My heart stopped, I stopped breathing, and I was catapulted out of my body. And I was in the corner of the room looking down at my body. I was in my astral body, my subtle body. And in the distance, I could see a light. There was a tunnel before me, and I was that light. I was not separate from anything. And it was my mother and father were originally opposed to my running away and living in an ashram. Too many people in the 60s were renouncing the world and going to India and living in ashrams. And very devout Catholic family, and they were very opposed to my being in an ashram. I had traveled the world. I'd been to 75 countries. I was studying with the Rosicrucian Fellowship correspondence course, and the last lesson after 2 years, the final lesson was, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And that week, my yoga teacher invited me to travel with her from New York City to California to meet her guru. And I had time, I was available. So we went in a 9-car caravan cross country and meditated together every day. And we arrived at the ashram, and the next morning I went to meet him, and the meeting was remarkable. I sat in his presence, and I immediately went into samadhi. You know, he looked at me, he glanced at me. There was a transmission from his eyes, light came from his eyes, entered into my heart. And really the only way to describe the indescribable is my heart exploded, just opened wide. And I was filled with a love that I'd never even imagined before. I was just madly, ecstatically in love with everyone and everything. The room was filled with light. I had no thoughts in my mind, and I sat in meditation for about 3 hours. He had me sit over on the side of the wall. When I came out of the meditation, I was the only one there. Everyone else had left. They allowed me to sit, and that began my sadhana. You know, I immediately moved into the ashram and stayed with Muktananda, with him and in his ashram for the next 8 years, doing sadhana, meditating daily, chanting, doing yoga, selfless service, and really devoted myself full time to the pursuit of the experience of the self. When I met him, I was on crutches. I had crippling rheumatoid arthritis. I had rheumatoid arthritis in my feet, my knees, my elbows, even my back was fused. And I used to, this was at the age of 25, I had to take cortisone injections to manage the pain, butazolidine pills every day. And the prognosis was that I would only get worse. Once I got Shaktipat, the Kundalini energy became very active and very dynamic in my physical body. And every time I would sit for meditation, I would begin to spontaneously experience what we call kriyas. Kriyas are movements of energy, movements of the awakened Shakti for the purpose of purification. My body would begin to move. My neck would rotate, go back and forth, swaying, hatha yoga postures. And this continued for about 9 months, where every time I would sit to meditate spontaneously, my body would respond with these physical kriyas. And sometimes when I would be meditating, my neck would be moving so fast like this, I was afraid my neck would fall off. I would hear all the bones cracking. It was loud. It was a little bit frightening at the first until I found out what it was. But the end result was that after a period of 9 months, I threw the crutches away and was able to walk. I've never had even an inkling of that arthritis returning. I returned to see my original doctor when I was in New York City, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. It was a spontaneous remission of rheumatoid arthritis, and it's never returned. So I was perfectly aware of the transformation that was taking place in my life. And I've just really described the physical changes, but the spiritual changes were enormous. Just on a daily basis, revelations, visions, miracles, all sorts of things were happening. I had a near-death experience myself. This was back in 1976. I was in Columbus, Ohio, meditating. I was visiting my family for the weekend. And for no apparent reason, my body collapsed. I was seated in meditation, and a picture of Muktananda in front of me. I was seated in meditation, and I collapsed. With my face hit the floor, my heart stopped, I stopped breathing, and I was catapulted out of my body. And I was in the corner of the room looking down at my body. I was in my astral body, my subtle body. And I was amazed because I hadn't done any particular practice for this purpose. And in the distance, I could see a light. There was a tunnel before me, or there was a dark space. And I was suddenly tumbling through this dark space, completely dark. There was a light at the end, a blue light. And I remember it being extraordinarily loud. It was like being in a wind tunnel. And tumbling, and suddenly I was outside of the it seemed to be a cave, into a pool of light. It was infinite up, infinite down, infinite in all directions. It was just simply the blue light of consciousness. And I was that light. I was not separate from anything. And it was, how to describe it? It was ecstatic. It was full of love. It was the awareness that I was eternal. It was just everything I'd ever read about. And here I was experiencing it. Suddenly into my consciousness, there became an awareness of my mother, and my mother weeping and crying, saying, "We've lost our David." And so I said, okay, I had a choice. I could stay in this pool of light or return back to human form. And for the sake of my mother, losing a son was not something I wanted her to suffer. So I came back. I chose to come back into a physical form. And it was like there was a long rubber band, so to speak, between my belly and my physical body. And suddenly I was back in the physical body. And it took me a couple of minutes to activate the heart and the breath. The blood was torpid, was solid. Slowly I was able to begin to breathe again. The heart began to beat, and I could feel the blood circulating in the body. And then I came back. It took me a little while to be able to move the limbs again, but I came back completely transformed with the awareness that I'm not a body, that I have a body, but that I'm the pure light of consciousness. And that's the truth of who I am, really. So I've lived from that awareness from that day on. There's times I forget. I'm still human. I still sometimes have desires or forgetfulness, but for the most part, that has remained my constant experience. Well, shortly thereafter, I had a chance to test the depth of my experience. I was once again visiting my family in Columbus, Ohio. Muktananda was staying in upstate New York in South Fallsboro. And I was home for the weekend visiting the family. And we were going to return on Monday back to the ashram where Muktananda was staying. And my friend Phil Madhukar had recently got his pilot's license and was renting a single-engine plane to fly us back to upstate New York. He said, "Come along." It was a small plane. There was only 3 seats in the whole plane. So we arrived at the airport on the Monday morning, and there was a series of delays. There wasn't gas available for the plane. It wasn't fully gassed up, and there was a problem with one of the tires. And there was just an endless series of delay. So we arrived at 8 in the morning. We didn't take off till like 11 o'clock in the morning. We're in the air about an hour, and Phil says, Muktananda appeared to me in meditation this morning and said, come see me. I'm really glad to see you. And then I remembered that Muktananda had said to him, "Make sure you leave by 10 o'clock. We had left at 11 o'clock. And I said, "Phil, why didn't you tell us this before we took off?" He said, "Leave at 10, we left at 11. What's going to happen?" These single engine planes, they're very slow. They take a long time to fly from Ohio all the way to New York. So it was like 6-7 hours we were in the air. And suddenly a huge storm broke out, a thunderstorm, thunder, lightning, dark, immediately just kind of rolled in. And we were trapped in this big storm. And Phil called ahead to the control tower and said, we've lost visibility here. There's a big storm. Can you guide us in? He said, well, just fly in by instruments. Phil said, I'm a new pilot. I haven't been qualified yet to fly by instruments. I can't do it. I don't know how. He said, well, look around for a place to land. So we did. We started looking around. We were in the fields, farms, fields, and every time we would spot a field that we could land, the fog would come in before we could actually land it. So meanwhile, I'm remembering a lecture that Muktananda had given the week before. He was talking about how at the moment of death, if you can remember the mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, before you leave, you'll attain liberation. So at this point, we were starting to get concerned that we might not survive. So we're all feverishly repeating, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. And I'm praying, Baba, if we're going to die, make it quick. Don't make us burn slowly because we'll forget the mantra. We'll be worried about the pain. So I made this prayer. Finally, we found a field that we could land in. This is right before sunset. The wind is blowing and the storm's going in. We come in, we had to bank the plane to make it to the field. And it was a short field. And there was a barn coming towards us really rapidly. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. When suddenly we hit a ditch and it tore the front wheel off and we flipped over right before we hit the plane. It was truly a miracle that we were able to stop and not hit the barn. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but at the time we were in the air, Muktananda was giving a lecture to 1,000 people. He was saying, there are 3 of my dear disciples coming to see me right now, and they're repeating the mantra Om Namah Shivaya. They'll survive this crash, and they'll be here in a few moments. So he had someone waiting at the door for us when we arrived. We got a ride, and he brought us up to meet him in the middle of, in front of all these people, and I had a chance to put my head on his feet, and I'd never had that chance before. And as my head were resting on his feet, there was a vibration. It was shaking. It was almost like a benevolent kind of electricity, kinetic energy that was causing my whole body to shake and to shimmer. And I have no idea how long he allowed me to stay there. But when I turned to leave, that same blue light that I had seen in my near-death experience was everywhere. All I could see was blue light, and I had to strain my eyes to see if there was a person there. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. There was just light above, light below, this beautiful scintillating blue light. And once again, I was in ecstasy. I felt in love with everyone and everything. And this experience stayed with me for a good 3 days. And I had the direct experience that the Shiva Sutra says, Chaitanya Matma, that the nature of reality is pure consciousness, pure light. Everything, there's only one consciousness, one being, and I am that. I had a direct experience of that. Whatever karma we've created in this lifetime, we take a form in a future lifetime that is a result of that karma. So that the final thought that we have in this lifetime is the thought or the belief that we've most cherished in this lifetime. So if we lived a good life, we believe that we're the self, we live the life of service, we can merge with the absolute and have no need to be reincarnated. If we still have desires, wants, and then we will be reincarnated in a human form that can best satisfy our wants and satisfy our desires. Muktananda did talk about different lokas. For example, there's a place called Siddha Loka. Loka means place. So there are different sort of levels of reality. And when one attains a certain level of consciousness, one goes and lives with the Siddhas, or Pitraloka, where you can live with your relatives. He did talk about that. So different lokas, different bhuvanas, depending on what's most important to us. So the universe, in a sense, is a benevolent universe. Is that whatever it is that we truly want, that's what manifests for us. If we still have worldly desires, we have the opportunity to come back in a human form and to experience those worldly desires. Once we want only God, only consciousness, only the self, then we can have that. All of the religions are pointing at the same truth from different angles. So describing it, we're trying to describe the ultimate truth, which is beyond words, beyond description, in a three-dimensional reality where words are symbols of things. So each tradition has its own ways of describing the indescribable. In India, they have this parable that they use of the six blind men trying to describe the elephant. So one is holding onto his nose and saying, "Oh, it's like a long tube," and somebody else is holding onto the leg. "Oh, it's like a big tree trunk," and someone else is holding onto the tail, and "Oh, it's like a broom swishing." So they're all describing the one truth, but they each have a part of it. They each have the whole truth in the experience, but in languaging it, in putting it into words which are symbols of symbols, they may differ in a different approach. So think about different paths up to the mountains. One starts from the east, one starts from the west, one from the north, one from the south. But when you reach the top, the mystics of all traditions describe it in much the same way, that it's experiential, it's within, it's the same in all traditions. When we're beginning the path, we see the differences. We don't see the commonality. When we reach the summit of the experience of the self, all the traditions merge. When you reach that place, you can look at the Taoist tradition and say, this is what they're saying. The Buddhists, this is what they're saying. This is what the Christians say. This is what the Muslims say. They're all speaking the truth in limited and relative terms. And they're all pointing towards the experience of it. That's really what it's about, experiencing our union with the divine. And we can call it by many names. We may call it Allah, or Buddha, or Jesus, or God, or Ishvara. The truth is one. The paths are many. So long as we think ourselves as separate from God, there is good and evil. Once we accept ourselves as divine and see things from the perspective of the divine, then everything is consciousness. The concept of good and evil simply dissolves. So both are true. So long as we believe in separation and believe that I'm a body, that people are separate from me, I should do good things. I shouldn't kill people. I shouldn't steal money. But once you realize that I'm the self, I'm pure consciousness, I'm eternal and all pervasive, then there's no place you can go where Shiva is not. There's no such thing as good and evil. You transcend the concept of good and evil. Think about good and evil as a concept. Right. And what's good in one culture might be evil in another culture. So they're just concepts, right? But they're helpful concepts until we realize the truth. Then we let all the concepts go. Well, one of the early experiences I had, having been raised Catholic, and I was not just Catholic, I was a devout Catholic. I was an altar boy from the age of 7 years old. I was the person who gave the lectures at church. I was considering becoming a priest at one point, even went to a Franciscan seminary for my high school. It's 4 years studying with Franciscans. So I was a very devout Catholic. And when I went away to the university, I began to think for myself, and I began to question some of the teachings of the church and sort of fell away from the church. Started looking at Eastern religions for my spiritual path. So I had these conflicts living with Muktananda, living with a Hindu guru. A Hindu was like the worst for a Catholic. It was like the furthest away from Catholicism, all the different deities, gods, goddesses, but here I was living in an ashram, and people seemed to be worshiping a man, a human being. And this always felt really uncomfortable to me, because we always believed that Jesus was the only way, and Jesus was the only truth, and you can only get to heaven through Jesus. But here I was having an amazing experience with Muktananda. So there was this inner conflict. So we were chanting the mantra Om Namah Shivaya one day. We were chanting it when suddenly, and it's difficult to describe this, when suddenly my consciousness descended from my head to my heart. So I was no longer looking out through my eyes, but I seemed to be centered in my heart, resting in pure light. And I was surrounded by this body that seemed to be outside of itself. It's the only way I can describe it, but I was centered in my heart. And there was this beautiful, beautiful, radiant white light emanating from the distance, coming towards me and getting closer and closer and closer. And when it got close enough, I could see it was the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And the Sacred Heart was my chosen deity, my Ishtadev. I always worshiped the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Jesus standing there with an open heart. And I could see that the love was coming out of his heart and entering into my heart. And I was just amazed. But the light kept coming closer and closer. And I peered inside of Jesus's heart. And inside of Jesus's heart was Muktananda sitting there on his throne. And the light was coming from his heart. And I was just absolutely amazed at the waves of light. And as the waves of light rolled over me, I was filled with love, filled with ecstasy. And I kept moving closer and closer. And I went into Muktananda's heart. And inside of his heart, I could see myself, David, sitting in meditation. And the light was coming from my own heart. And I was amazed. And I could hear Muktananda laughing. And he was saying, "What did you expect to find here? What did you expect?" So this really resolved my conflict between Muktananda and Jesus and my own self. I could see from my own experience, they were all one consciousness, one light, one truth. Just as an added benefit, when I came back to the awareness of my physical body, I came back and I was seated in the cave of my heart, and I could hear my body singing in tune. Now, as a kid, I was always the kid that was tone deaf. I couldn't sing. I couldn't hear the notes. And they would always tell me, act all enthusiastic in the choir, but don't make any sound because you're flat. But my body was singing in tune, on pitch, perfectly, without me doing anything. It was just singing. And since that time, I've been able to sing. I lead kirtans. It was another aspect of the miracle. It was opening the inner ear to hear and to appreciate music. Shaktipat is the direct transmission of fully awakened divine power from a siddha, from an awakened being, to a disciple. And it removes whatever blocks there are to the awakening of the Kundalini. It happened in his presence spontaneously for many, many people. During his second world tour, the crowds were getting so large, people coming wanting to receive Shaktipat, that he created a program, a 2-day program called the Intensive, the Shaktipat Intensive, where he would facilitate the awakening for those who wanted to receive it in 4 main ways: through the look, either looking at him or the student looking at the guru, the thought, the sankalpa, the intention of the guru, the word, the mantra, or simply through the touch. He would go around during the meditation and touch people with the peacock feathers. And what happened was he would remove the obstacles to the natural awakening of the Kundalini. And he often described this Shaktipat as kind of like priming a pump. So if you're pumping water and there's no water coming out, you can put a little bit of water in and pump it, and it will draw the Shakti out. In the same way, the Guru would transmit some of his fully awakened Shakti into the disciple, then draw that energy up through the spinal column, awakening the Kundalini, purifying the different chakras, and initiating a process called sadhana. He would prescribe specific practices for each of us to do that would fully awaken the Kundalini. But many people had powerful experiences at the intensive of the awakening of the energy, but that was simply a state experience that began a process of inner unfoldment that required doing sadhana, doing spiritual practice over a long period of time, in order to fully awaken the experience to a stage of development where that state became your permanent stage of being. And that takes time. So the initiation is called Shaktipat, and then we do a period of sadhana until we can maintain that awareness in its fullness permanently. Many of us have leaks. People have old bad habits. So we get Shaktipat, and then we revert back to our old bad habits, and the energy leaks away, and then we need to do practices to rekindle that fire. Kundalini is a very powerful energy that needs to be contained with it. And this is one of the reasons that some traditions encourage you to keep quiet about your experiences so you can contain the energy. When the ego takes over and you want to tell everybody, I had this amazing experience, you're leaking the energy. If it comes from a place of purity, we're extending the energy, we're sharing the energy. We can actually become a vehicle for Shaktipat for other people if it comes from a pure place. But the danger is that many of us, the ego gets activated when we get Shaktipat, and we want to tell the world, and that's when we dissipate the energy. So Muktananda encouraged us to share our experiences from the heart, not from the ego. Back in 1980, after I received sannyas from Muktananda, he then made me his master of ceremonies, and I sat next to him when he gave these Shaktipat intensives. And he trained me diligently for the next 9 months on how to give these intensives. I became the speaker at the intensive, the master of ceremonies. He instructed me how to give Shaktipat, and instructed me when Muktananda returned to India that I should continue to do that. And so I've done that now for over almost 45 years. He showed me how to give Shaktipat, simply to remember him. He even gave me his peacock feathers, which I have right here. So his peacock feathers, which is the vehicle that I use for touching people, giving Shaktipat. He gave me his clothing that he was wearing when he gave intensives. He gave me his lungi, his kurta, and a vest and everything. So he really said, just remember me when you do this. He says, if you think you're giving Shaktipat, you'll get fried. But if you remember that you're simply a channel for the lineage, it's the power of the lineage that he transmitted to me. It's be a representative of the lineage, just as I am a representative. And I remember before the first intensive that I facilitated, I was feeling unworthy. How could I give Shaktipat, And I remember putting my head on Muktananda's sandals. He gave me his sandals before he left. That was his final blessing. I put my head on the sandals, and I was just remembering him. I was just overwhelmed with the responsibility, or so I thought of doing the ceremony. And I decided to look up, and I looked up, and above me was Muktananda's face. I could see his face, and his face were on the sandals of his guru, Bhagavan Nityananda. So I leaned back further, and I could see that Bhagavan Nityananda's face was on the feet of his guru, Ishwara Iyer. And so I leaned back as far as I could, and there was no end to the chain of guru and disciples, all the way back to Shiva. So I said, okay, I just put my head on the feet of the guru, and the lineage will take care of the work that needs to be done. So yes, I continue this work in India. We usually have one of these Shaktipat intensives about once a month or so here. We've been in Rishikesh, we've done them in Goa, we've done them in Kashmir. So right now I'm involved with a project called Second Education, bringing meditation into the school systems of India. And it's very time involving. So right at this present time, I don't have any of the Shaktipat intensives scheduled, but come the fall, once my workload eases up a little bit, we'll resume having these. And we're even considering a Shaktipat intensive online. I've never done that. I know that some of the teachers in my lineage do it. Guru Mai, she does Shaktipat intensives online. So we'll consider how to do that and let everybody know when that is. That'll be likely in September or October of this year. In the intensive, we give two different forms of mantra initiation. One is the initiation mantra, Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. It's the mantra of the Siddha lineage. It's the mantra that Muktananda received from Bhagavan Nityananda, and he passes that on through. Also, on the second day, we do an initiation on the practice of Hamsa. Hamsa is a practice that comes from the Vidyan Bhairava Tantra, ancient tantric agama scripture, dates back thousands of years. And in it, it describes the process of breath, and the mantra Hamsa being the natural breath that we learn and receive initiation into the practice of Hamsa. And people can use whichever mantra they prefer. Om Namah Shivaya. This project that I'm working on for the government of India right now, it's to bring meditation into all of the schools in India, all the universities and all the schools. So it's a big project. It's taking time, but I do want to continue offering the Shaktipat intensive on a regular basis. I have a WhatsApp group called the Brahmananda Sangha. It's a WhatsApp group, and my WhatsApp number is +1 country code 714-925-6646. So anyone can join, and it's there that I'll post the details of the next intensive. +1 714-925-6646, and I'll add you to the group.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.